Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to our little computer chess world. Welcome to a new game that was played by two top engines, and today's brilliant positional game will be a great game played by Stockfish against another top engine, Houdini, in the Berlin defense. We have now the Berlin wall, and recently we have seen also for instance in the game between Carlsen and Nepo that also the Berlin defense is very popular, that still it's playable in top grandmaster level. There are good opportunities for black to get at least an equal endgame. I think the most important thing of the Berlin defense is to trade off the queens, then to go into simplified lines, then to find maybe good opportunities to play with the bishop here. But there is, in my opinion, one huge positional problem that the white is always using in order to beat the Berlin defense, and it's the pawn majority attack. So that's why the title is simple as that. The pawn majority was always, I think, the main problem of the Berlin defense. Here I think you witness again the most important strategical moment of this pawn majority attack when it comes to beating the Berlin defense. So let's check out now again the main theory of the Berlin defense and also this most important attacking element of white. So here Stockfish opened with the move e4. We have e5 by Houdini, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5. The Spanish game, the Ruy Lopez, is on the board. We have knight to f6. We have now the Berlin defense. After move castling, we have now the so-called Rio gambit, and now after move knight to e4, we have now the Rio gambit accepted, because now after move d4, the e file will be opened, and of course you could face many tactical problems. So that's why here knight to d6 is the most important line. You have to challenge the bishop on b5. So here bishop to c6, we have d takes c6, and now after d takes e5, we have knight to f5. The problem, I think, of this particular line for white is that you would love, of course, to keep maybe the e file open and play the move knight to e5, but then the main issue is I think the pawn structure. So that's why you should not go into this particular lines. Although it is still playable, you not probably lose the game because you played knight to e5. But the problem is now when we watch now the pawn count here on the queen side, then it's obvious that we have here a 4 versus 4 situation. If you take out now like this, if you take with d takes e5, then of course we have now a pawn majority on the king side. We have now the 4 versus 3 situation on the king side, and although black is also a 4 versus 3 situation now on the queen side, it's not so easy for black to create a pass pawn here. That's the main issue, I think, of the Berlin defense. The main issue is, of course, that even if you try to push some pawns here, maybe black can get some spaces on the queen side, but you cannot really proceed in a good way because, as I said, it's really hard to create a pass pawn. And if white plays the game correctly, then white can maybe block out the position without allowing black to create a passer. So that's why here it's much easier for white to create a pass pawn, basically because we're playing a simple 4 versus 3 situation. And see now that will be the actual main strategical goal of Stockfish here, how Stockfish will make progress here from white's perspective. After d takes e5, we have now knight to f5, and still this position has been played millions and millions of times. It's nothing wrong with this move. As I said, it's not a problem that you have reached now this position from black's perspective and you should resign immediately. But when Stockfish is playing these games, it's really different. After move knight to f5, Stockfish goes, of course, queen to d8, king to d8, and now knight to c3. Normal development. We have bishop to d7, and now h3, with ideas, of course, to play g4, then maybe knight to h2, then f4, simply getting this pawn storm, getting this 4 versus 3 situation on the king side. So here bishop to e7, and again a great move by Stockfish, I think, bishop to g5. This position has not been reached so many times, I think, in chess history. At least I'm not seeing so many games in the database, but I like simply the idea of here of Stockfish to again undermine the pressure, to simplify the game by trading off more pieces, because we want to reach the endgame stage. We want to trade off more pieces. We want to get our pawn majority 4 versus 3. So you have to make that happen by trading off more pieces, because then you can reach the endgame stage. If this game reaches the endgame stage, then I promise you white will have a comfortable game. So with the move bishop to g5, what white is also doing is getting rid of the bishop pair, because the bishop pair is, of course, much better than a bishop and a knight, and especially in this asymmetrical pawn structures like this, the bishop pair can be really a nasty threat that you can face. So here after c5, maybe bishop to c6, b6 or b5, I think black could have also then a decent setup. So trading off the dark square bishop is actually, in my opinion, really a nice positional idea. So here we have h6, we have bishop to e7, knight to e7, and now rook from a to d1, getting of course this tactical mess on the d file. So that's why king to c8. Again, it seems like a strange idea here for maybe for black to play the king like this, but still in one particular moment, rook to d8, maybe b6, king to b7 can be played, and it's almost like black as castle, because the Berlin Wall, that's why it's called the Berlin Wall, is this pawn structure which is not allowing here the knights to jump into the game. You see all of this very important squares are taken for the minor piece activity. In one particular moment we can even try g6. So you see the Berlin Wall means that the knights cannot jump here really on this other side of the board. So that's why so far it's a great restriction setup here of black. So here after move king to c8, we have now knight to d4, we have now b6, we have f4. Now we're getting our 4 versus 3 finally, also with opportunities to play the move g4. c5, we have knight to f3, knight to g6, and now knight to h2. Here we have bishop to c6, knight to g4, we have rook to e8, and now knight to e3. Here f6 played by Houdini. Interesting idea to maybe solve now all of the positional problems on the king side, because here it's obviously a great pin, because if you take, you lose the knight. But Stockfish found a great move here, played simply the move e6, because it seems so after rook takes e6 that Houdini of course played that f5 is the main threat, but after f5 of course we can take, and then you didn't gain anything. But actually the main goal of Stockfish was here this move, knight to f5. Although it was a temporary loss of the pawn, here the g7 is now a long-term weakness, so that's why rook to e8 has to be played. And the problem is now you cannot take immediately. You can maybe face this problem. Taking out on g7 is still not a possibility, because you get rook to g8, you have to escape somewhere, and then you get bishop to g2. If you take, then you get the discovered attack, and then we can also take out this one. So that's why it's not good to take the pawn immediately with the move knight to g7. After move rook to e8, Stockfish first played the move rook to d3, because still it's not defendable anymore, this pawn. Here in the continuation we have king to b7, now rook to g3, now after move knight to e7, we have now knight to g7, rook from e to d8, and now f5. Getting really the pawn structure on the king side fixed. Now we want to play rook to f2, protecting our second rank, because there are many pawns on the second rank. Probably in one moment black will occupy the second rank. What we want to do then is play rook to f2, king to h2, and then simply push these pawns. We have now a 3 versus 2 situation. In our previous analysis it was a 4 versus 3 situation. Now by trading off the pawns, still it's a pawn majority here in the Berlin defense. So here rook to d2, as promised, we have rook to f2, rook takes f2, king to f2. Now basically here Houdini allowed even Stockfish to improve simply the position of the king. We have rook to g8, we have now a3, we have now a5. It's very important, I think now a3 is a cool move, because it's very important now to keep the pawns on dark squares, because the light square bishop of black could of course attack this position. We still have this pawn on f5, which is of course on the light square, but so far it is very well protected. So here after move knight to d1 was played, here rook to d8, knight to e3. We have again rook to d2. Here Houdini tried this other rook maneuver in order to again attack the second rank. We have now king to e1. Great positional game here by Stockfish, because after move king to e1, you see the knight on e3 is protecting both of these pawns, and now the rook simply has to retreat. So rook to d4, knight to g4, knight to e6, and now knight to knight to d5, knight to e6, attacking the rook. We have a rook to e4, and of course king to f2 again. We have bishop to b5, knight to e3. Again, Stockfish is hoping to simplify the game, so don't be worried so much when you're playing again the Berlin defense, because your main goal is simply to trade off more pieces. If the game again reaches the endgame stage, let's see, knight to e3, rook to e3, rook takes e3, king to e3, nothing dramatically, because even if you try here bishop to f1, knight to f4 solves all of the positional problems, and now we can play g3, h4, even g4 maybe, and then try simply even knight to d5 if it's possible, maybe to take out one one of these pawns. Knight to h5. If we grab another pawn, then it's of course game over, because as I said, although here it's a 4 versus 3 situation, black will lose many tempi. Black needs, I think, here maybe even 10 moves just in order to maybe create a passer. So even if you reach this position, this is simply a game over here for black. So knight to e3, we have knight to e7. Houdini is not trying, of course, to simplify the game further by trading off more pieces. We have rook to f3, because there was maybe now the threat knight takes f5, knight to f5, rook takes e6, and similar stuff. So rook to f3, we have now king to c6, and now knight to f4, we have rook to d4, now g4, we have king to b7, king to g3, we have bishop to e8, rook to f2, again protecting the second rank, because what Stockfish is trying probably to do is play much more freely now, maybe with this knight on e3, because the knight on e3 we used temporarily in order to protect our c2 pawn. Now with rook to f2, Stockfish is announcing that it's basically trying now to play much more actively with this knight. So here bishop to f7, knight to f1, we have rook to e4, we have king to h4, we have rook to king to c8, knight to g3, attacking this rook to e1, we have knight to h5. Because if bishop to h5, king to h5, you see this king is then very active. You have to play rook to knight to g8, but then again king to g6 is possible, so the king is much more active. Again, the simplified line is not helping black out in any way. So here I've removed knight to h5, we have knight to g8, knight to g7, we have knight to e7, knight to e6. Again, bishop to e6, knight to e6 is not bringing anything. Again, king to h5. So the problem is now any trades of pieces is not helping out black here in the continuation of the game. Really great position game by the fish. So here knight to e6, rook to b1, we have now c3, protecting of course our b2 pawn, but not only that, of course with the move c3, white is keeping all of the pawns on dark squares, which cannot be of course attacked by this life for bishop. So rook to e1, we have knight to f8, rook to d1, rook to e2, we have a knight to g8, we have now knight to g6 again, king to d8, knight to e6 check, we have knight to h8 attacking the bishop, and now after move bishop to e8, again a great move here by Stockfish, knight to c7, deflecting simply this king from the defense of the bishop. Now the bishop is attacked. If you take, of course, then we simply take out this one, the knight is hanging, then we can take out this one and getting of course here a huge pawn mobility on the king side. So here bishop to d7, we have now knight to e8 again, we have rook to d3, knight to g6, bishop to b5, rook to e6, again some attacks, but not a problem. Here Stockfish is again regrouping, and again knight to e6. As said, even if you trade off now some more pieces, again it's not bringing you anything. Still it's a completely winning endgame here for white. And the rook to d7, king to h5, b3, bishop to c6, c4, we have king to b7, now simple a4, blocking out the position further. We have king to c8, rook to e3, rook to a7, knight to f8, we have rook to f7. Here we have a great move again played by Stockfish, rook to e6, counter attack against the bishop on c6, king to b7, now knight to g6, we have king to c7, and after h4, rook to g7. In this position Houdini resigned. So the problem is obviously this one, knight to d5 will happen, g5 is now huge opportunity. We can also take out this one, even knight to f6 is a possibility. If rook to f7, then we can maybe trade off more pieces, so it's simply game over here. So as I said, great game. It wasn't maybe this usual Stockfish brutal attack tactics all over board game, but it was, I think, an interesting positional game, and I think you can apply many of these strategical elements in your own games. If you're playing maybe against the Berlin Wall, if you're playing against the Berlin defense, the pawn majority attack is a huge strategical element of this opening, and I think you should use it as element very often. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting stuff that was played by Stockfish. If you want to study some more games like this, check out the official TCEC website, where you can find also some other games played by Stockfish, Lila Zero, and some other top engines. Here's the you can see the link of the TCEC official website in the description below. Please check this out. It's very cool. You have many great games on that chat's website. And if you want to study some other games with me in top engine place, check out my commented chess games played by computer series with some more great games played by Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.